Hello everyone, welcome to today's Healthy Transitions Office Hour entitled Developing Healthy Supportive Adult Relationships. I'm Joanne Oshel, I'm with the TA Center. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Nicole from the TA Center to get us started.
All right, thank you, Joanne. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's office hour. We have a very exciting topic with some great speakers on today's session who are going to discuss the importance of developing healthy, supportive youth and adult relationships. So this office hour will explore how Healthy Transitions grantees can identify the adult allies within a youth or young adult's life and the different roles those allies might play in supporting successful transition, as well as how allies can partner to support youth and families. The presenters will discuss how to navigate family involvement when young adults no longer want their families involved, and ways to support and engage families as their youth explore independence and enter adulthood. All right, so here's a quick disclaimer to tell you that the views expressed in today's office hour do not necessarily represent the views of SAMHSA. And as an introduction to our topic, I also want to illustrate how this office hour fits in with the larger Healthy Transitions and Project Aware initiatives and within the TA Center. So here at the TA Center, we provide training, resources, and supports to 3 different types of grantees, including Healthy Transitions, Project Aware, and the Recast grantee. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, we have some excellent presenters on the line today to talk with you all about building supportive adult relationships. So Bree Maselli is the Director of Technical Assistance and Evaluation at Youth Move National. Through her work with Youth Move, she has become an experienced speaker and presenter on the importance of youth voice, youth and young adult engagement in systems change, and youth peer-to-peer development. Melissa Pearson is also on the line with us today. Melissa is the project coordinator from the Family-Run Executive Director Leadership Association, or FREDLA. She brings over 20 years of personal and professional experience navigating systems, advocating for services, and partnering with professionals on behalf of children and youth with behavioral health needs and their families. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn over today's office hour to Melissa, who's going to review some of the objectives for today's session.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, everybody. We are really glad that you were able to join us today for this office hour on this really important topic of supportive family and adult relationships. I'm going to briefly go over today's objectives before we get started. And what we're wanting to really talk with you folks around today is the concept of how supportive adult relationships exist on a continuum, and how throughout a young adult's life those relationships will shift, and it's a very fluid process along that continuum. We're going to talk a little bit about how family and youth-run organizations can be valuable resources to you in your work within your Healthy Transitions initiatives, and how they can play a key role in helping to effectively engage family and youth partners. We want to also help you think about how folks such as youth and parent peer supports can help young adults and their families develop supportive adult relationships, and also how you can identify individuals who can play key roles, supportive adults in a young adult's life. And then lastly, we're going to invite you to share your learning and your successes with us around this topic area so that we can have some peer-to-peer learning, so that we can all learn from one another and have a dialogue about maybe some opportunities for how you can move the work forward in each of your communities. So I'm going to pass it back to Bree to get us started with some true and false questions.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So what we want to do is we want to start off and think kind of a little bit about where your thought process has been around healthy relationships for young people. And so we're going to play a little bit of a true and false game. Melissa and I will kind of go back and forth a little bit. Please use the little feedback box above the chat function. So the first question is, high-quality relationships are essential to young people's growth, learning, and ability to thrive. Is that true or is that false? So we'll give you guys a little bit of time. All right. So hopefully the feedback function is working well, and it seems like you all got that correct. The answer is true. The Search Institute is an organization that does a lot of youth and young adult relationship research, as well as building protective factors in young people, and they definitely identify that in order for young people to live a thriving life, they definitely need strong, healthy relationships to anchor them in that. So we'll move on to question 2. All young people need is one caring adult. True or false? Okay, I keep seeing the little pie chart kind of moving, so this is good. Give you a little last minute little bit to put your answer up. So, like many of you, oftentimes we have heard the research that says kind of one caring adult is all a young person needs. That has been the research for a really long time. And most recently, Tufts University, through the America's Promise report that they put out, highlighted that if the young adult picks one caring adult, it doesn't necessarily mean that that one caring adult is a positive protective factor to be in their life. And they looked at a lot of young adults who were unsuccessful with high school graduation, and it came down to a lot of trauma that may have happened and their ability to find people in their life to help them, but they often found very high risk, poor kind of peer social groups and identified a member there as their one caring adult. Yes, they did care, but it was an unhealthy relationship dynamic. So just keep that in mind when we're constantly saying, you know, one caring adult can help. Is it the right caring adult? All right, and we will move on to question 3. I'm going to pass this one. I think Melissa is doing this one.
This question reads, young people who have families engaged in their care tend to have better health outcomes. So is that true or false? Give folks just another couple of seconds to respond. Okay. It looks like all of you have indicated true, and that is correct, that young people who have families engaged in their care tend to have better outcomes. Not always. As we know, there are some circumstances, as Bree just talked about, related to the one caring adult, that some young people who have families engaged may not necessarily. However, they do tend to have better health outcomes when they have supportive, healthy family relationships. Strong, supportive family relationships tend to be one of the strongest predictors of positive long-term outcomes for young adults, and it is also one of the strongest protective factors for young adults to have healthy, supportive family relationships in place. The other piece to keep in mind when working with young people and young adults is that oftentimes having these strong, healthy family relationships in place are really crucial, because frequently when young adults may have things that aren't going as well as they could be or should be, the family is a place for them to turn for support in times of crises. So it can be really important for families to be having these kinds of strong relationships in order to help those health outcomes be more positive. So I think you're taking the next one, Bree.
Great. All right, so adverse childhood experiences have a lasting impact on an individual's ability to form relationships. True or false? Well, it seems like this one is pretty universal, 100%. So of course, adverse childhood experiences and experiencing trauma at an early age definitely has a lasting impact on one's sense of safety, their ability to trust others, and their ability to seek relationships. Oftentimes that could really impact how they build a healthy relationship, and also how they may be accessing helping services in the process. So it definitely brings a bit of a tougher challenge at times to the table when you are trying to engage and form a relationship, just because it starts off in sometimes a distrustful, unsafe feeling for young adults. So it's very important for you to have that kind of trauma-informed perspective and understand that forming relationships can be very challenging for this age group. And that kind of leads us into our very last true or false question, which is Melissa.
Okay. Family members are required to be involved on youth or young adult care teams. Is that true or false? Okay. A couple more seconds to let folks register your true or false response. It looks like we have most people saying false, with a couple indicating true. And this one is kind of the way it's worded for youth, young adults. In the case of someone under the age of 18, a family member or caregiver is required to be a part of those care teams. However, for young adults who are 18 or above, there is no requirement for a family member. However, it can be a really valuable, really beneficial thing for a family member to be part of those adult care teams when appropriate and when a young person or a young adult is in agreement with that. However, family members, whether they're part of a care team for a young adult, that is only one way that a family member can play a very integral role in helping support a young adult and helping to play a key role as a supportive adult in their life. And in a few minutes, we'll talk a bit about some other ways families can stay connected to their youth and young adults. But I'm going to pass it off to Bree, who's going to get us started on some context around this subject.
Thanks, Melissa. We all know that relationships matter and that as human beings, we're all hardwired to connect with other people. It's part of who we are, and without a sense of connection with others, oftentimes we feel disconnected, isolated. We struggle at times to speak up, ask for help. And for young adults, it's crucial. They're in their stages of understanding who they are as people, kind of their hopes, their dreams, and their aspirations. And without having a strong sense of connection to others, it can really hinder the young person's developmental process in really kind of finding who they are and accessing the right appropriate supports and services. So the Search Institute most recently published some work around the value and understanding of a developmental framework for how caring adults can support and build strengths within young people. And so this here is their framework that relationships are the heart of what young people need. And youth who do well had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. Now, I know we just did the true and false question saying that one caring adult might not be enough, but here you have to acknowledge that this person was identified as supportive and committed. So they did kind of quantify and qualify that this was a healthy, strong relationship for them. They also, within their research, recognized that supportive relationships are critical in adolescent development. They provide an environment of reinforcement, good modeling, and constructive feedback, which we know youth and young adults, though they may not always feel that they need that, sometimes they still do through their developmental process. And so it's being able to have a good relationship with them to understand what reinforcement means and the good modeling and how to give the constructive feedback in a way that's going to maintain the healthy relationship versus isolate and alienate the young person. So it's that balance of constructive feedback versus giving advice. It's like, when is it given versus when is it sought out by the young person. Supportive relationships enhance sensitivities, motivation, and skills involved in assisting and caring for others. So this really helps young people kind of build their compassion for themselves and others and what they're able to not only kind of bring to themselves, but what can they contribute back. So you'll see the cycle here. It talks about resilience, growth, social and emotional skills, education, employment, and again, that giving back and civic engagement. So those are all kind of, through their research, critical components that in the right healthy dynamics, young people, if they have a strong foundation in this, in partnership with caring adults, they tend to be more successful in their adulthood and long-term goals. Relationships are developmental when they help young people discover who they are, develop abilities to shape their own lives, and learn how to engage and contribute to the world around them. So this really is kind of a learning by doing mentality. It's really a negotiated mutual experience versus an adult said I should do this, so I should do this, that kind of top-down, which we know with the population we tend to work with young adults with mental health challenges or youth and young adults who have been kind of in the system for a long time. that top-down approach often kind of disengages them and scares them out of any sort of helping system. And so it really is a different kind of shift in how we think about how we frame our conversations and how we frame our relationships. The study also indicated that developmental relationships are a mix of 5 key elements. The caring and supportive adult must express care, must challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. So these are really critical for all of us, even as adults and helpers and in our own, is that we want the people around us to express that they care for us. We want them to push us appropriately to learn new skills or try on new ideas, but not push us so much that it makes us afraid and we step away from the challenge. We want them to provide support that feels really kind of the right fit for the right activity and for the right need. And we want to share the power, which really is about shared responsibility and shared decision making, and that it really isn't this top-down approach, this I'm the adult, I know better, I should tell you, what to do so that you avoid maybe whatever challenges that they have had in their past. And expanding possibilities is to get the young people not to remain so rigid with only one path, one goal, one kind of track, but to think bigger, to think, what things could be like if, and to kind of keep that curiosity that we never want to lose within young people, because when we lose the curiosity, we tend to lose some of their hope and aspirations within the process. So these were really great, kind of 5 things. So when you're working with young people, to really say, okay, am I expressing care in the way that the young person recognizes that I'm expressing care? Am I pushing them too hard to do something? Am I kind of pushing them just right? Have I even asked if the support I'm providing is the right type of support? And am I pushing them to think bigger? So we know at Youth Move National that young people are connected to so many people. There's a lot of people around them that want to be supportive, that want to help influence and be there in good times and in bad times. And we started off the webinar talking about this continuum of supports. And so many of you may have seen that Youth Move National, for our youth leaders and young adult advocates, we utilize a continuum to outline the journey of going from being a recipient of services into these more leadership advocacy and kind of youth coordination roles. And then, like myself, I started off in the work. I do have lived experience, but I'm older. I come to the work with a different frame of reference now, and oftentimes I am a supportive adult in the lives of some of the young people that I engage with versus still considering myself a peer of theirs. And that changes based on the person that I might be working with and the age and our experiences together. But when we hit that very last piece on the continuum, which is supportive adult, what does that mean? Supportive adults can come in all kinds of avenues. And so Youth Move and Fredla was really thinking about where are young people tapping into these supportive adults, and then how are the service professionals and the caring adults that they're engaged with, how are they then increasing their social network to have more folks involved in their lives and building that kind of human capacity that all young people need. So here on the continuum, you see natural relationships, relationships that are rooted within community, services, and professional relationships. So this document currently right now is in the works. We consider natural relationships. We have a couple bullets there, but we consider natural relationships are relationships that occur and develop naturally between people outside of any formalized organizations or service. So this could be a natural relationship between a child, parent, and caregiver, or natural relationships between their siblings, or how the young person may define who is a part of their family. And so some of these are just kind of those natural relationships that young people cultivate. As we think of community relationships, we define that as relationships which are made of formal by an organizational and or an activity in your community, but not directly related to the provision of services from a social system. And so this is where you tend to see the coaches, the youth pastors that might be running a youth program, educational teachers in community programming, sponsors, big brothers, big sisters. There's a lot of opportunities within your community to be connected to organizations and caring adults, but it doesn't mean that they're handling your treatment plan necessarily, and you're not going to them seeking out, help within your health service setting. And again, on here, this is where we tend to see that a lot of the family-run organizations and youth-run organizations would fall within this kind of community-based. There's a little bit of a structure, but it's not necessarily driven by a diagnostic or service need. The next category is service relationships. So these are relationships that are made formal by the provision of an organized service or support. So this is kind of because of a mental health challenge or because of a very clear identified need and an expectation for some sort of support in that relationship or improvement. These are relationships that seem to have a bit more of a commitment and tie to them. So this is where you see those formalized service providers, your clinicians, your therapists, perhaps your probation officer, parent peer providers, and youth peer support providers. Again, these are the provider roles, so if it's a billable service and you're formally attached to help the family and or the youth kind of navigate their care decision-making or the system of helping in a very formalized assigned role, then it would fall here. And then we have the professional category, and we define that as relationships which exist in a professional environment, such as between your supervisor and yourself, a colleague at your work, and or yourself. So these are professional relationships. So this may also be professional relationships that those who are working in the system with lived experience or young adults or entering in, they have still perhaps a more structural relationship. So there definitely is a power dynamic within the relationship and how that relationship may play out. So knowing what we know about the value added of those 5 key areas on the previous slide that the Search Institute has indicated for successful relationships, we, throughout this full continuum, young people may be connected to multiple people, and we want all of those people to be positive and supportive relationships that are continuously expressing that care, promoting the growth, the support. We want the relationships to kind of share that power and decision-making through a youth-driven process, and we definitely want them to encourage and support the expansion of future possibilities and aspirations that the young people may have. So with that being said, I'm going to check in with Melissa because I think she has a little bit more to add to this particular slide.
Yeah, I think, Bree, what I would add here, and it kind of ties into the previous 2 slides that Bree just talked about, that developmental framework of relationships piece and how that connects in with the parent-caregiver kind of relationship with young adults. We oftentimes see, that very first relationship that really, from a developmental standpoint, helps young people develop skills, abilities, and knowledge comes through that parental relationship. And so it oftentimes is kind of that foundational piece that can be reconnected or connected in a different way that can really help a young adult be in a place where they can develop these other supportive relationships that Bree very nicely articulated on this continuum. I think the other piece of this is that, the continuum is intended to create an opportunity to see the different roles that young adults need within their array of supportive adults, to express that no one person or no one system or service should feel responsible to be the supportive adult in a young person's life, that there needs to be opportunities for multiple supportive adult relationships, including family, in a young adult's life, and that we really want to look at, as Bree talked about, how those 5 key elements can support all of these relationships, especially those around a family component. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, but families oftentimes, from going from a place of having a very, very hands-on role, a very primary decision-making role, and then be involved in a transition of their role as a caregiver can oftentimes struggle to know how to kind of infuse those 5 key elements in the way that they want to support their young person. And so it creates a really optimal opportunity for folks in your grantee communities to kind of use that framework to help families understand how to better position themselves in a supportive capacity for the young adult.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So as we move on to the next slide, it would be great for you all to consider perhaps a relationship that you may be in, that you consider yourself to be a supportive adult, and where did that relationship kind of start? Was it a natural relationship? Was it rooted within a community connection that you had, or has it been a service and or professional relationship? So just kind of reflect on a relationship and consider who initiated that relationship, because I think that oftentimes that is really crucial to think about who initiated the contact between you and that young adult. Was it formalized? Was it something that emerged naturally? So youth move, understanding that in the work that we do, young adults are around a lot of caring adults that are willing to be as supportive and as helpful as they possibly can be to make either the young adult workforce or the youth that they're serving and supporting to be as successful as possible. And so again, these are those 5 critical areas. It also shows kind of what that looks like for the youth and thinking about the circles of all of the environments in which young people are. It has been challenging for us at Youth Move National to really kind of understand that youthful perspective. What does support mean to them? What does that relationship look like, and how that relationship is negotiated so that both people that are participating in the relationship have a clear understanding about what that expectation is. So sometimes young people change their minds, believe it or not. And one minute they want you to tell them what to do because they just need the guidance. And then at other times it's like, stop telling me what to do. And that can change from morning to night, and it can change within the same conversation. And so it's really important as someone that is engaging with young people to really understand what it means to them. So Youth Move National have been doing some work and having some focus groups when this topic really started emerging to really kind of understand what does support look like for youth in the context of these relationships that are naturally kind of forming in the work that we do. And so a couple of the highlights from that focus group where we pulled a lot of youth coordinators and youth who had been recipients of service into the conversation, young adults told us that support means that someone is understanding, someone who has the same background and who has the same experience. That's what it looks like for them when the youth connects with another youth and or young adult peer in a supportive relationship. So there's some commonality, there's some mutual understanding, and that they can kind of gauge the same experience, which allows them, because they have that shared mutual experience, they're able to provide support in a way that young people feel very comfortable. What we also heard from young people is that support to them means that they need to have the flexibility. They need to have a little bit of structure, but they also need the flexibility to be able to move through some of their challenges on their own, as well as know that if they're struggling and they need the support, that they know the right person to call to help them navigate through that. One other interesting thing was really understanding support versus help. Young adults were really, when we asked them, like, is helping the same as supporting, and what does that mean to you in the work that you do or within services? Young adults told us that help is very different than support. Helping a youth means that the supportive adult, that there's a problem and the adult is there to fix it. Whereas support is, yes, there still might be a problem, but the supportive adult is giving tools to the youth so they can find solutions to fix it themselves. I think that is really, really critical in the work that we do. Sometimes we often jump in and we try to what is referred to a lot in the peer support consumer world is swoop and save. Is that we never want someone to be heartbroken or hurt or without. And so when challenges and problems arise, someone swoops in and saves and fixes the day. And yes, that is gracious, but oftentimes it does not help the young person or the person kind of be able to feel in control of their situation and empowered enough to learn skills to help themselves out of it. And so I thought that was very, very critical for us to understand the difference of help versus support and what does that look like kind of within the relationships we have. So if you do identify that you're a caring adult and you haven't had an opportunity to kind of negotiate what your caring adult and supportive relationship may look like, I encourage you to seek clarity to understand what is expected in and out of the current relationship that you have based on how your relationship was started. So was it formal, professional? This helps really with boundaries. So if it starts in a more professional setting and then they graduate from services, what does that look like now that they're not necessarily a part of your organization as a recipient, but now perhaps an advocate? Does that change your dynamic? Talk about that, negotiate that, and see what that means to you and what that means or could look like from a youth perspective. Check in. Don't assume that because you have a healthy, positive relationship from your perspective that you are a young adult's particular caring adult. And did they identify you as a supportive adult? Maybe not. And so don't assume the role, but make sure you ask. So check in on that on a regular basis. And then I encourage you to create space. Create space to negotiate the relationship dynamics and reflect on how it's working, both for you and for the young person that you might be supporting. And keep in mind that all young people need more than one person. And the work that we do in the helping system can be tiresome, overwhelming, and a little tough at times. And so the more supportive adults you can connect the young people with, there's more people to share the responsibility with. So if you're not available, they have other people to call upon. And that is what is most impactful for success within adulthood, is that the young person has identified the right person to support them in the right moment, and they feel empowered to do so. And we want to encourage that more. So again, this is just a little kind of recap. Okay. So maybe, Melissa, we'll have you jump on in.
Okay. All right, thanks, Bree. So now we're going to look a little bit deeper into the specific supportive adult relationship role with families. But before we dive in here, I want to just remind you, based on what Bree shared with you and the framework that she just went through with us, I want you to now kind of shift from thinking about how that relates to your work in your role potentially as a caring adult or a supportive adult with the young people that you're working with, and now think about how those same kinds of principles and same kinds of philosophies relate to the role that families should play as a supportive relationship with their young people. And I think the clarification around help versus support is really critical as we think about the role of families, because families have spent typically 18 years protecting their children, saving their children from, skinning their knees, from, the bully on the playground, from the, bullying at school, to all kinds of different things. And in this transition that the young person is going through and the family is going through as well, we now need them to shift from helping their young person to supporting their young person, and supporting them as defined by the youth in the sense of not only support me to develop my own solutions and my own skills and my own tools around addressing my own issues or problems or challenges, but trust that I can do that. Believe in me enough that I have capability to solve my own issues and to cultivate my own solutions. So as we think about family members as a supportive role for youth in transition, we really want to start from the premise that family should be self-identified by the young adults and should be defined by them. And what we mean by that is that we don't want to kind of put restrictions on that it has to be a biological family member or an adoptive family member, but that oftentimes in different cultures and in different communities, friends of family members can be just as close and just as supportive and engaged and involved in a young person's life as a biological family member might be. And so as you think through these supportive adult relationships, and as you work with young people to cultivate this array of relationships, let them kind of self-identify who it is they determine is family to them. As I just mentioned, also be mindful that the role of family transitions when youth transitions. And so what we mean by that is that there's a transition process happening both for the youth and for the family. And so those roles are shifting, those roles are changing, they're evolving, oftentimes very quickly for both young adults and their family. And so we have to be mindful that while we probably much more naturally understand and respond to the need for young adults to have support to manage these transitions, we also need to ensure that families have access to support and resources to manage this transition. And so some of the things that Bree's talked about, these are very, very valuable concepts to share with family members to help them understand how they need to position themselves to be a supportive adult with their young person, and so they're not putting themselves in a position where a young adult feels like they're being pushed beyond where they want to go. They're not being kind of told what to do. Their family isn't kind of stepping in and taking over and fixing things for them, etc. So some of the roles that families can play in a young adult's life can be very, very varied across a variety of circumstances. But some of those roles might include housing. They might include transportation. They might include kind of helping be that educational advocate for that young person and helping them if they're still in kind of under an IEP in school, helping them kind of navigate that process and understanding how to, use their voice, how to advocate for themselves, how to give that educational history. And some of these come up on a kind of a case-by-case basis or only when things sometimes aren't going well. So sometimes family members are called upon to play kind of the role of crisis response when a young person is in a troubled spot. Or they might be called in to, serve in the role of healthcare navigator, whereas, the young person might not want them directly involved in their treatment planning, but they also might need some support and assistance in navigating, okay, how do I find a primary care provider? How do I handle, making sure that my meds get refilled on time, et cetera. So I think the roles that families can play in a young adult's life are very, very broad. And I say this to encourage those of you working with young adults to think very, very broadly with that young adult so that it doesn't feel to them like if I want them involved, it has to be in my treatment planning, but rather to have an ongoing dialogue with them about what are all the ways that they might be able to play a supportive role in their life at whatever level that young adult feels would be helpful. And so sometimes it can really be helpful for them to understand that, okay, you might not want your family integrally involved in your day-to-day treatment process, but would it be helpful for them to, be available to you from a healthcare navigation standpoint if you run into a snag negotiating, your healthcare with your doctor or whatever. So just to kind of keep those things in mind. Some considerations, the first one being around that piece that, we mentioned at the beginning, that, you come in contact with youth or young adults that say, no, I don't want my family involved. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One, developmentally, it's a normal process for young people to want to strike out on their own, to want to create their own identity, to want to be their own person and not be under kind of the shadow of their family and having their family make decisions for them. And so there's some normality to that for them to say, no, I really would prefer that they not be involved. And so I think, you know, what we would say is that no doesn't necessarily have to be a hard no, in the sense that, you know, keep that conversation open. Revisit that periodically with young people, because things change. And just like there are other supportive adult relationships on that continuum, will be a very fluid process, and some will come and go depending on where they are in their journey. So too should the conversation and the revisiting of whether or not family members can play a supportive role in that young person's life. And I think it changes that conversation about yes or no, we want them involved, based on helping that young person see the variety of roles that that family member can play. So they may be more open when they know that their parent does not have to be directly involved in the intimate knowledge of what's going on in their mental health care. Some of the other reasons on the flip side of that, you know, while we have young adults and youth saying, no, I don't want my family involved, we also have those families who are at a place where they say, you know what, I've worked really, really hard to get my child here. I've spent a lot of time navigating systems, you know, putting out fires, managing crises, and I'm really just tired. I've put my time in, and I really just need to focus on me or my other children or my marriage or what have you, and they're just really burnt out. And so I think we have to understand that. We have to be respectful of that, and we have to know that when those families are in that place, they're not necessarily saying, I don't want anything to do with what's going on with my young person, and it's not that I don't ever want to be involved. It may mean that they just temporarily need to kind of tap out for a bit and just take a break and catch their breath. And in those moments, the most effective way to keep them engaged is to really just offer support, really create a place where they can have a safe space to vent, to share, and to connect with other families that are in similar circumstances. It's important to consider cultural issues as it relates to the different family roles and responsibilities based on the culture of that youth and family. So being mindful that in some cultures, you know, elders play a very, very critical role in the kind of transition process of young people. And in other cultures, it's very much expected that when a young person reaches the age of majority, that it's time for them to kind of spread their wings and be on their way and figure it out. And so those pieces are really important to take into consideration as you negotiate with that young person what roles family members might be able to play in their as a supportive adult. And then lastly, really considering, are there barriers family members to play roles in a young person's life that we need to be aware of and we need to be willing and ready and able to try to address for families. And those could consist of anything from transportation needs, that they may not be in an area where, you know, public transportation exists or is readily available, and they may not have a vehicle to be part of, you know, meetings, so there may need to be some flexibility around where those are held, different times of day based on their work schedules. There may be some financial limitations for them that, you know, they just don't have the resources to help their young person as much as they'd like to. And that may not be their choice, but it may be a reality for them. There could be employment issues around, you know, oftentimes when families have been raising children with behavioral health challenges, they've had to take a lot of time off from work. And so sometimes they feel very, very hesitant to take time off from work, continued time off, because they may be in jeopardy of losing their job. And that may be, you know, really important, especially if they're a one-income family. So just kind of trying to think on both sides of the coin around how to support young adults to build those supportive adult relationships, but also how do we support the family component to be available and able to be a healthy, supportive relationship for that young adult, and what do they need from us to do that? So what we know about family engagement as we think about how we might be able to help support these kinds of relationships for young adults, we know that we have to be intentional in the organization about this. And so what we mean by that is that it can't be an afterthought. It can't be something that sits over kind of, as a standalone. It has to be a very intentional process for the organization. That also means that it has to be something that happens throughout the organization. It has to be a culture within the leadership from the top down, meaning that there has to be an expectation that this is part of the value of who the organization is and that it is everybody's job to really promote and foster and be a conduit to positive family engagement in the work that you're doing. It has to be integrated throughout the organization, and what we mean by that is from the point of contact, whomever's making those initial contacts with families and young adults, all the way through to the administration, programming, and all of those, CQI pieces within an organization. There has to be this infusion that family engagement, family involvement, family inclusion is a priority of the organization as it relates to how we serve young people and their needs. We have to create opportunities for staff to have training around what this means, how to do it, how to conduct themselves in a way that really promotes and fosters family engagement, and that's really best done through a co-led process with family members, where families themselves can kind of share their experiences about what works, what doesn't, and how they would like to have systems respond in a way that makes them feel engaged. We also know that we need to create opportunities for families to be engaged at all levels. So it's not enough to say, yeah, we want to give you a seat at the table as it relates to your young adult kind of scenario as far as their services, supports, their treatment, but we also have to say, we know that your voice can have positive impact at other levels as well. And so we have to recognize that some families really want to help shape how the organization operates. They want to shape how the evaluation process of the programming looks. They want to help inform the policies to be more family-friendly and more youth-driven in the way they operate. So it's important to make sure that you're thinking about opportunities for families to engage at all of those different levels based on where families feel like they want to plug in, because different families have different interest levels as to how they want to be engaged and where they want to be engaged. And lastly, there needs to be dedicated resources. And so, we see sometimes communities or organizations say, we really think it's important to have families engaged. We really value families, at the table and the voice, but there aren't any dedicated resources to support family engagement. And there really has to be, because it takes time on the part of staff to do the work to really effectively engage families. And so they have to have the time flexibility in their schedule to do that. It takes resources. If we're going to have families at all different levels, we have to think about compensating them for their time and contributions to how they help us frame the work that we do in our organizations. So there has to be more than just a verbal commitment to this. It really does take dedicated resources to pull it off and be effective. So just kind of some practical strategies to consider as you're thinking about family engagement and looking for opportunities of ways to engage and include families. The first and foremost place we would encourage you is to really reach out to statewide, local, or regional family-run organizations in your state. And we can help you with that. We have a list of organizations in each state where your grants are located, and so we can help you identify where the organizations are in your state and how you can reach out to them. They're naturally positioned to be able to be a resource to you in the work that you're doing engaging families and young people. And so they oftentimes can be kind of that peer voice to help families see engaging as being something of value to their young person, their family, and broader than that. Dedicate resources. As I said, there needs to be staff resources dedicated, and there needs to be actual funding committed to family engagement. Establishing family engagement council of staff and families. This can be a really great way to begin to think about different ways families can be involved, and it's really powerful to have staff from the organization and families working together to kind of craft an agenda around how will we transform the work that we do to be more inclusive and more in partnership with families. Creating opportunities for parents to meet their peers. Family, it's very powerful for families to be able to meet other families who are in similar circumstances. And, Bree talked about this earlier related to peer support. It's very, very important for families to know they're not alone, that they're not the only parents or caregivers struggling with these kinds of issues and going through these circumstances. And, when they connect with others, not only do they, it builds hope, it builds compassion, and it creates an opportunity for them to learn from one another. Host events for youth, young adults, and caregivers together so that they can see how those supportive adult relationships can be positive, and that they can spend time together learning about how they can work together effectively as the young adult goes through their transition. Conducting trainings for staff in conjunction with parents or caregivers, as I said, and those are things that have to happen routinely. Again, it's not kind of a standalone or a one-shot deal. It's an ongoing process. Integrating parents in the evaluation and CQI efforts has proven to be extremely valuable for many organizations across the country. To really have families help organizations think through what are meaningful outcome measures to families and to young people. What are the kinds of indicators we need to be paying attention to? And then how can you take that data and analyze it to then turn around and continuously use it to improve the work that you're doing, and having families help you figure out what does this data tell us and what can we do differently to continuously improve the work and our capacity to partner with parents and youth. And lastly, celebrating achievements and successes, both of the organization and of youth and families and young adults. Transition is not an easy process for anyone involved, for the young adult, for the family, for the systems. And so there are often achievements and successes, and it really behooves us to stop and take time to really celebrate those and really acknowledge those, and really kind of take stock in the progress that you make. There's no real finish line in this, but it's really about kind of identifying where you are and where you want to go and starting somewhere. And so it's not about saying, we should be further than we are. It's, here's where we are today, where would we like to go tomorrow? And so those celebrating successes and accomplishments can really help keep the momentum up as you move forward in challenging yourselves to do more. So I think we're going to stop there. We really want to take some time now to open it up for some discussion. And we'd like to start with having you think about how does your community create roles for families to best support their young adult or support the Healthy Transitions Grant. And so some of these are really framed around the pieces that we've talked about, both Bree and I, around kind of expectations, training, feedback, evaluation, those kinds of pieces. So we'll give folks a few minutes to think about this, and then we'd like to hear from you folks on the line how you're kind of doing this in your community, where you're finding opportunities to engage families as supportive adults in a variety of areas. And for folks that are on the call, we'll open the line so you can just talk, and if for some reason you're not able to communicate through the phone, there's always the ability to put your responses into the chat box. So does anybody have any examples? Do all of your young adults have supportive adults identified? Do they all have families involved? Does your organization support adequate time to be a supportive adult in the engagement of family members? What are some of the successes and challenges that you're experiencing in this area?
One of the things that, Melissa, when I was working in my community with transition age youth that came up often was some of the young adults, they did not always have strong family connections. And when they became, they were young adults, and so some of them grew up in foster care, so they were disconnected from family altogether, or others just because of whatever reasons, they weren't actively involved. But when they became pregnant as young adult and teen moms, they got really anxious. And so one thing that I found was very beneficial, though we had a really strong youth transition program, they really needed to connect with another parent who understood parenting. And so, so thinking about this age group and thinking about your recommendations about how to utilize family organizations, that was a way when I was in my community that I found to be so helpful for me because I'm not a mom. And so a lot of the times the young people I was working with, it's like I couldn't really be that peer, that parent-to-parent peer, that they were looking for a parent to kind of guide them around some of those parenting things that they might be experiencing. So I found a nice connection that, you know, these young moms needed another parent to kind of role model for them since theirs was not involved. And partnering with our family org, that made that really helpful.
That's a great example. Bree, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really good point that I think it really speaks to the changing and fluid needs, I think, of young adults at different stages and under different circumstances. And so, you know, I think it kind of resonates around how important it is to have, you know, good capacity in the array of supportive adult relationships because, you know, you never know when you might need someone in one of those categories we went over in that continuum. Anybody else have an example? Go ahead, Bree.
I'm looking at the chat box here, and it seems like one of the big challenges, as Denise is saying, that is that their young adults don't want their family involved, and how can we bridge this between youth and young adults and their families? And it seems like Tanika from Florida also agrees that they would prefer to achieve some of their goals more independently than in partnership with their families. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You're going to have young people who they're not going to want their families to be involved for a variety of reasons, you know, sometimes very good reasons. And so I think, again, it's going back to kind of revisiting first that definition of them self-identifying family and maybe, you know, exploring with them. Are there folks who maybe aren't biologically family but that they kind of see as their family that could play more of a role in that aspect? Are there extended family members that maybe could be beneficial or supportive to them that maybe are not, you know, as parents or caregivers, but maybe there's someone else? Are there siblings that maybe would be helpful? So I think it's helping them think through if it's not their immediate family, are there others who can kind of almost fill in that family role and helping them think about that. And I think that sometimes it is that ongoing conversation with young people, and I think it's all of our responsibility to first and foremost kind of promote the value that supportive family relationships have. You know, as we talked about, one of the strongest protective factors, it's one of the strongest predictors of positive outcomes. And so if we have an ability to reconnect young adults with families, it's ideal. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes there's just no ability for us to do that. And so then it becomes an ongoing dialogue with that young person over time to help them keep that in their thought process and to continuously be looking for how are there ways for us to cultivate family-like relationships for them. Because sometimes we just can't in the traditional sense.
And one thing I would like to add is to also consider that that's a very bold statement that a young adult is making when they say that they don't want their families involved. That is probably rooted in a lot of pain and hurt. And so recognizing and honoring that for any young adult who is that clear and adamant of not having their family involved definitely has a complex story. And so even if you can't make the kind of get the parent involved or they're very adamant, there's a place to start there in helping them heal. And so I love the idea of are there siblings or other extended family and others, but really thinking about at its core, what is informing that decision for them? And is there a therapeutic kind of service processing piece that needs to happen for young adults? Because we know that young adults, when they have been hurt and harmed or disconnected, something has happened, and sometimes the mentality is, instead of dealing with the trauma, I avoid the trauma. I stop talking about it. And if they kind of don't handle, manage, or heal, they carry that with them, which can impact a lot of relationships going forward and or their ability to maintain their wellness. And so just keeping that in mind, that there's a lot being said when they make that statement, both on cultivating others to support them, but also to understand how they're making that decision and where it's rooted in from that trauma perspective.
This
Definitely.
is Katie, from Fredla, and I had mentioned in the chat box that as a parent that I really struggled with making that transition in my role from really being the rescuer and always swooping down to save and fix, like Bree had talked about, to really just becoming more supportive. And as our son went through transition and really wanted to be independent and he did not want us involved in his care plan, it's hard to find that, balance of stepping back and being supportive. As I look back now, it would have been helpful to us if, whether it was a family or youth organization or a counselor or some community group, could have maybe facilitated the discussion with our son and us about, to him, what does support look like that he would want from his family and his parents, instead of just shutting us out. What would that look like? And help us learn, because as parents, you tend to kind of only know one or two ways, of what you've done all those 18 or 19 years, to support and fix and put out fires and advocate. Right. And so it's really hard to make that change. So
I think that's a really good point, because I think we have to make sure we're helping families understand how to transition during the time that their young person is transitioning, how to position themselves in a supportive way and not in a way that oftentimes makes the young person even more resistant to wanting them to be part of the process.
This is Tanisha.
Go ahead, Tanisha.
I was going to say I agree with that. I agree with that as well. I think when we talk about parent and family involvement, I think we need to look at the type of involvement we're talking about, because I think a lot of times we talk about them in their involvement as it relates to this youth or young adults transition plan. But what we find is that the families and the parents are supportive as it relates to making sure they get to their appointments or providing them with shelter and food and resources they need, such as clothing. So they're involved at that point. But when it comes to the transition plan, that youth and young adult is like, no, I want to go to my therapy appointments by myself. I would like to do my transition plan by myself, because they feel sometimes that the parents will not support their goals, or it's really a process for them becoming independent. And what we see is that when we do the NITT-TAs, although they refuse to have their parents involved with their plan, they still rely on them for support and know that they're there in case of crisis. So what I'm saying is that for some of these youth and young adults, it's a part of growing up and it's a part of being independent. And I think for them, too, there's an aspect of, I've burned the bridges with my family and they don't believe in me and they don't trust me, and I need to do this by myself and achieve these goals by myself and show them that I can do it and show them that I can achieve something. And we find after the parents are not involved and that youth and young adult achieves their goals, it actually strengthens their relationship with their family over the long term. So I think something is to be said about support and what type of support we're referring to, because although they're not involved in the transition plan and the wraparound team meetings, they're involved in other aspects of this youth and young adult life.
So one thing that I have found useful with working with young adults is to kind of consider with the young adult, both if you're the transition facilitator or you're trying to work with them to kind of understand how much support would they like or how much involvement from their family, is I've always used kind of this rationale of 100% means that they're involved in driving all of the decisions that happen. And so what percentage of involvement do you want them involved? And one particular young person that I was a support in their life, we had agreed that it was going to be a 60-40 relationship. They would do 60% and they needed me 40%. So whenever I felt that I was doing more than the 40%, we had a renegotiation and a dialogue about, hey, why am I doing 80 and I haven't seen you much and you're not coming and, you know, I keep calling and I keep putting effort in, but there's not the response. And so it was just kind of a really interesting way to kind of quantify for the young person in like a picture of a pie of like, this is your life. How much of this would you want support in? You know, if you want 100% support, that means someone's making your decisions for you and they're doing it all. And that's not what we want. But what would be comfortable for you? And sometimes that starts off as a 50-50. Sometimes, depending where they're at, they're like, I'm really, really in dire need. It's 75-25. And maybe you do need to help them a little bit more. But it is just a nice kind of checks and balance, like a check-in, that helps start a negotiated conversation. That could be another consideration.
Yeah. So let's hear from anybody on the phone who wants to respond. Are any of your organizations providing professional development related to family engagement and partnerships with families, either related to kind of families playing roles within their young person's transition or families being involved at other levels within the organization, whether that be, you know, helping inform programming decisions or support groups or things like that? So is anybody doing any training with their staff around family engagement and partnerships with families? I know in our community when we started doing some of this work that what we found when we started doing training with staff was that many of the staff really didn't understand the real context of what they were being asked to do related to family engagement and partnering with families. And they really thought that it was kind of all or nothing. And they really felt like, okay, it's either they're part of the treatment process or the transition planning process or they're not. And there wasn't a lot of understanding related to kind of this holistic approach of, yes, we're working with this young adult, but we know that many young adults will seek support from their family in the ways that you talked about, Tanisha, about housing, about if they're in a need financially, clothing, food, transportation, these kinds of ways. And so we know that that young person is still having a relationship with their family. Their parent or family or caregiver is still involved in their lives as a young adult. And so how are we helping support that parent, whether they're involved in the treatment planning process or not, to be, supportive in the way that that young person needs them to be. So while they may only be going to them for some of these basic needs, they're still part of their, their life. And so how are we helping staff help these family members to understand some of these concepts we talked about today around how young people see help versus support? That, when you step in and you kind of tell me the solution, here's how it makes me feel. It makes me feel like you don't trust that I can figure it out. It makes me feel like you don't believe that I have the skills to do this on my own. It makes me feel like you don't trust me to make my own decisions or, those kinds of things. And so when we did training with staff, we found it was very, very beneficial for them to gain a better perspective and a broader thought process around, okay, what does it really mean to engage families in this process, and that it doesn't just mean related to families are part of this, plan or part of the actual direct service delivery, but it's also about how do we help educate families to navigate this transition process with their young person in a way that really does strengthen their relationship rather than the young person seeing them as being intrusive or trying to take over or, still trying to kind of, as young people often say, control my life or make my decisions for me. Anybody else had other experiences related to training staff or engaging families in different capacities outside of just the treatment plan?
I know a lot of you guys do a lot of like wellness programming for young people, so they come together and they do kind of things that are outside of maybe their formalized like transition facilitation type work. But are there any of those that it's kind of like a bring a caring adult or a supportive adult to also attend with them, or to share perhaps talents, skills, or things that they might be doing in some of the wellness programs outside of the kind of facilitated treatment planning part that they can share their successes with? So that could be a consideration. Remember the showing of gratitude and the celebrating successes, so that if you are utilizing kind of perhaps some music and art, poetry, or some self-expression type projects, or the young people are just really proud of a particular campaign or activity they participated, kind of host an event and celebrate the young people, but encourage them to identify caring adults in their lives that they'd like to share the work with, and kind of host an evening kind of session. That's just a really natural way, not to say, let's talk about my challenges and let's talk about my treatment or my therapy, but it's a really nice, softer way to just kind of share some positivity with the young people, and then it helps your staff get connected with who else might be in this young person's life if they haven't recognized. So it's just another kind of more celebratory kind of event that could be helpful.
It's a great idea, Bree. Great idea.
Organization could also plan host and plan an activity, a joint activity. Maybe it's a youth and family picnic, or some kind of outing that the organization funds and hosts and plans, and then ask the youth to come and bring those, invite their family or those they consider family or other supportive adults to come. And
absolutely
have it nothing to do with their treatment plan or discussing their case or anything of their problems, but just about relating and connecting and having fun, and whatever that might look like. Maybe have your youth and young adults plan it with your organization, and let them take the lead in giving you the ideas of what they'd like to do, or sometimes that can be real helpful.
Peggy, I love that idea. We did life skills, and we were teaching young people cooking skills, and then all of a sudden, after we had all this food, and the young people, of course, would be able to eat, but we had so much food that one day we said, hey, we're going to keep these cooking classes going for the next so many weeks. It takes us this long to cook the food. Everyone can invite one guest to join us at this time for dinner. And then they kind of were able to learn some cooking skills, but also were able to break bread and connect and have casual conversation over a nice hot meal. And it was a great way to get those supportive adults and family members kind of into the world of the service system that was there supporting their young person.
Well, and I think it's so, the other thing that's so valuable about that, not only does it give the young people an ability to kind of demonstrate their successes and share something they feel good about with their supportive adults and their families, but it also gives families an opportunity to see the work that the HT communities are doing with these young adults. And I think that sometimes is really helpful, too, in engaging families. For families who might be a little hesitant or may not always show up to things, sometimes they're not really sure about what is this, what does this mean? What is my young person involved in? What are they doing? And so sometimes they're not really sure how it all relates, how it all fits together. And so I think it's a really nice opportunity for everybody to learn more about each other, families to learn more about the programming and about what their young people are involved in, for the systems to learn more about who those supportive adults are in that young person's life, and, for that those young people to have an opportunity to really demonstrate their successes and celebrate the hard work that they're doing to have accomplishments and reach their goals.
So as we get ready to wrap up, since I just want to kind of guide you back to a couple of those action steps that after today's webinar that you could consider sounds like those of you that have been able to share some experiences are on the right track with how they're thinking about supportive adult relationships and or family relationships. And there's possibly some additional informal kind of innovation that you all could bring to your projects as well, based on some of the examples shared. But the work that we did today, some of the continuum and that kind of study that I touched upon about the developmental framework for relationship building that the Search Institute put out, if you have not seen or opened up the TA Center's email that you get kind of weekly of different resources and things, intentionally because of today's webinar, there was a lot of resources that were identified around building supportive relationships and fostering youth-adult partnerships and family partnerships in the newsletters. So if you haven't checked those out, check out the newsletters, the research studies that we referenced, and the actual guidebook that is downloadable and available, I believe, was a part of one of those resources. So if you want to read more up on the framework and all of that, that would be available to you, and you can download the links there. Keep in mind, the family-run and the youth-run organizations, we have contacts, Melissa and or Peggy from the Fredla team can easily help connect you if you guys are not necessarily connected already, and foster some kind of starting conversations. And so keep those kind of action items in mind. I don't know, Melissa, if you have any other kind of next step reminders aside from resources and things that I just mentioned?
Nope. I don't think so. I think you did a beautiful wrap-up, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you need additional assistance, there's contact information to contact the NITT-TA Center on your screen, so feel free to reach out to us if there's anything we can do to support you in your work.
Great, and I hope you guys, again, thanks for chipping in on the true and false kind of little quiz game we started with. So thanks for sticking with us this afternoon, and have a nice rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa and Bree.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.